Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. Before we get to this week's guest, I want to remind you to subscribe to this channel and share it among friends and family, and also reach out if you know anyone that has a Catholic Christian testimony to share. John Edwards is this week's guest. I'm going to tell you about John. You got to visit this page. As I say about so many apostolates, this is a really well done page. Justaguyinthepew.com. About John. Like so many men, I vowed to be a better person, husband and father, time and time again. It wasn't until I felt the presence of Jesus as I walked out of a jail cell that I realized how much I wanted to change and how I could only do that with his help. Since that time, I've taken a journey to grow closer to Christ. I invite other Catholic men to accompany me as we follow the path God has set before us. John, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to see you, first of all. If you can take some time, just maybe provide a brief summary about your apostolate, what you're trying to achieve.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Eddie. I've been looking forward to this, and I really appreciate the invite and the time to be with you. Yeah, so our website there, justaguyinthepew.com, that has everything. And really what our apostolate is about, it's a couple things. One, we have a podcast called Just a Guy in the Pew, which I have one of my best friends in the world is a co-host with me. And we spend anywhere between 30 and 42 minutes, give or take, on the week, just discussing everyday things that everyday guys deal with and what our Lord says about it, what our faith says about it, and how we can work through those things with the power of God in our life and the sacraments and all those things to be the man that we're called to be the men we're called to be. So we put that podcast out there, and we have guests. I mean, I've had everybody from Father Larry Richards, Ralph Martin, Matt Fradd, all kind of folks that I have the blessing to have met in my life. So we have the podcast that comes out every Tuesday. But the main part of our work is really going into parishes and starting vibrant, life-changing ministry of men. We have found in the last few years as we've been in this ministry that that's what parishes are missing. 86% of our parishes do not have ministry to men in our parishes here in the United States. Anything spiritual for men. And so we go into parishes, we help find leaders, we train those leaders, we raise them up, then we go in and we do a mission, and we basically hand off this new leadership format, this new way of meeting together, and what we call the four pillars, which are a night of fellowship, a night of worship, a night of service, and a night of formation. And so men are actually living the wholeness of a man together. But more importantly, it's a place where we're building where men can be real. They can take off the mask, they can be vulnerable, they can lay down all the facades and all those things and be met in a place where they can build authentic relationship with Jesus Christ and with other men, through the things that we're planning and helping parishes launch. So we've started 30 of those around the country. That's what we love to do. We go twice a month and do those restored parish missions and group launches all around the country. So you can find out more of that at justaguyinthepew.com as well.
Fantastic, John. Thanks for sharing that. I'm
Yeah.
assuming, like so many other stories, that what you just described was the result of your story, potentially.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
Amen. 100%.
100%, yes, and that's clear that God uses those stories to then launch something to redeem the situation and to provide the grace to enable you to go out and start these things, light some fires in the parishes
Yeah.
and in men. Why don't you take us back to your upbringing? Maybe
Sure.
give the audience a flavor of how that all started.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised and still live here in Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up Baptist. My parents both were from the same town in Mississippi, about 2 hours south of here, and they moved to Memphis for work when they got married. We wound up being members of a church not far from the house, and that's where I grew up. All my friends from a young age moving forward were from there. I went to an Episcopal school just because we lived in an area that the public schools weren't that great. So my parents worked hard to send us to a private school, and there was one literally 3 blocks from the house. So they sent me there. So I had a little bit of, raised Episcopal in some way through education, but my heart was in the Baptist church. And if you were to go to my parents' house this day, you could find photo albums with me and the same kids from the time we were in diapers until we were about the age of 18 in that Baptist church. Every day the doors were open, I was there. I fell in love with the Lord at a young age, was evangelizing, going on vacation Bible schools, going to church camps, mission trips, anything that there was to do to serve the Lord and to do alongside my friends, I was there for. And it was that way until I was about 18. That's when everybody kind of went off to college. Living here in Memphis, we're surrounded by SEC schools, within, 6 hours at the furthest, probably. Maybe Florida is a little bit further than that. But for the most part, you could be at any Southeastern Conference school within a couple hours drive. And so a lot of people's parents went to those places, came to Memphis for work, and the children, their kids wanted to follow in their footsteps. So all my friends at the age of 18 wanted to go off to college, and they did. Well, my dad went to night school, and my mother went to the Mississippi College for Women, so that wasn't an option for me. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I enrolled at the University of Memphis here in town, and didn't know what I wanted to be. I started working at 16 at the place my father did. I worked at an auto parts place, working in the back of a warehouse, stocking parts, loading trucks, things like that. So I enrolled in the University of Memphis, and man, I'll tell you what, I was really lonely at that point in my life. I went from having this community and being surrounded by it in my church, I should say. They didn't have a young adult program. So it
Mm.
was, it was really strong growing up as a child through Sunday school and all those things and into youth. But after that, the next age up was my parents' age, Sunday school. So at an 18-year-old kid who wants to go sit in a Bible study with their parents, so I was not one of those kids who did. And then above that, it was just a heavily weighted elderly church,
Mhm.
on the top end. So that there was really nowhere for me to go. So I enrolled in college, and really was just it was a long time of my life right in there in those years of being lonely and isolated and without friendships, and so I started to seek those in other things.
Okay. What is before talking about the other things,
Yeah,
did you stay in contact with anyone as they moved away? Because I think of my story, which we will not get into, but
sure.
I felt something very similar. Tried to stay in contact with certain friends, but it felt forced. It was really weird. It was like the end of a chapter leaving high school and not
Yeah.
finding those same types of friends elsewhere.
Yeah, it was very similar to that. I mean, some guys went off to college, some got vocational jobs out of town, things like that. But there was one that my best friend that I stayed in contact with, and he eventually moved back. But time had passed and relationships had changed, and we were in different parts of life. So it was hard. I was really struggling at that point in my life. All I was doing was going to work and going to school, and didn't have anybody really to share life with. And I quit being engaged in the church other than to just go to the Sunday sermon, and that was it. So it was a very vulnerable part of my life. And often when I give talks to high school students, I share that with them. I say, look, I know right now in your junior and senior year, you're sitting here thinking, okay, just another year or two, I'm going to be on my own, and I'll have my freedom and get away from my parents and do whatever I want. And yeah, that's true. But freedom's a good thing if you know who you are. But if you don't, it can be a very dangerous thing. And I figured out as we'll talk about, I'm sure, that I had a lot of father wounds. My father was raised on a farm. He was one of six kids, and his parents. I didn't know this till later in life because his father died the year I was born, so never had a chance to meet him. But his parents didn't get along. They treated him a lot like farm hands, and so my dad, there was no "I love yous" and "I'm proud of yous." It was just, this is what's expected of you, and if you do a good job, you should know you did a good job, and you have a roof over your head and clothes on
Yep.
and things like that and food on the table. So that should tell you you're loved. And so I didn't realize at that time in my life until later that I was missing a lot of those things. And when that community went away, that ache started to grow. And I went to college looking for anybody and anything that I could belong to and that would, tell me who I needed to be, which is the danger of that freedom is when you don't know who you are, you allow other people to tell you who you
Tell
should
you who
be.
you are. Yeah, and who you should be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So then what were you drawn towards if you can get into a little bit of that, I'm assuming a very dark season?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So University of Memphis is a commuter school. We affectionately call it Tiger High because it's most of the people are driving to it. It's not, somewhere where kids are going in dorms and all that as much as other colleges. So everybody was coming and going, and I was surrounded by thousands of people, but I never, I didn't know anybody. Go to class and I try to talk to girls and things like that and not have much success. I didn't have guys to run around with. So one day, there was this one girl I had been trying to talk to, for a while in class, not getting very far with it. But this one guy walked in and he had on a fraternity shirt one day. And she started chatting him up immediately. And I thought, man, well, maybe I should get me one of those shirts. So, so I knew one guy left in Memphis, and he was 2 or 3 years older than me. He had always been a guy in my life that had brought me along. So he'd gone to our church. So he also went to the high school that I went to after I left the Episcopal school that only went to the ninth grade. I went to a public high school. So he was a couple of years older than me. So he always let me run around with him at church, which made me feel good, hanging out with the older kids. And then in high school, it was really helpful. As a sophomore, I was hanging out with seniors. So he had always been very kind to me. I knew he was still in town. I gave him a call. I didn't know what he was up to. I knew he was going to the University of Memphis. And he just said, "Hey, man, yeah, I'm here." And I told him how I was struggling and I was lonely and all those things. And he said, "Well, I'm the rush chairman for a fraternity, and it just happens to be the time of year where we're looking for new people. So actually, if you come up to the Strip tonight, the bars and all that stuff around college campuses," he said, "we're actually having a night at one of those bars, and you can come up here, and if we like you and you like us, then maybe we can find you a home." Now, I never drank really a lot in high school. I messed around with it a little bit, but not much. And so I go up there just really nervous and just wasn't my scene. I was always the good kind of church kid. And so I go in here, and it turns out they like me, I like them, and they gave me a bid. Well, that was the last day I went to church for about 11 years of my life. All of a sudden, I started to look around at the things they were doing, and this whole world opened up to me of women and drugs and alcohol and partying and all these things that I'd never really been a part of. I've been sort of a sheltered child as it came to that. My parents didn't drink. They didn't do a lot of going out and partying and hanging out or anything. It was always just kind of hanging around the house. So it was this new sort of experience for me. And I had moved up in my job. I was working as a shipping manager at this warehouse now at the auto parts place. I was making about $35,000 a year as a college kid, which was like being rich. So people found that out pretty quickly that I had money and means. And I started looking at these places, these father wounds I didn't realize were father wounds, but these aches I had to be liked again, to be a part of something. So I started looking around the fraternity when I got in and started thinking, okay, well, who's cool and who do people like and what do they do and how do they act? And so I started to mimic that. I was like a chameleon among men. I just was what anybody wanted me to be. And I had money, so all of a sudden I could get people into clubs. I could buy beer. I could pay for gas. I had a car, all those things. And I made friends pretty quickly, at least, what I thought were friends. But pretty soon I looked at their behavior and what they were doing beyond that. It wasn't just drinking, it was drugs. So, pretty quickly I found myself taking pills, Xanax, people's medicine cabinet pills like that. Guys were getting from their parents' medicine cabinets, taking things like that. Then it moved on to things like LSD and ecstasy. And I'll never forget the worst night of my life, or at least the one I made the worst decision of my life, to do cocaine. That was a mistake that followed me for 17 years of my life. I was over at one of these guys' houses, and we were hanging out on a Sunday afternoon watching the NFL and smoking pot and drinking and stuff like that. And it got to be about 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and it was Sunday evening. I was thinking, man, I need to go to work. I've got to go to work tomorrow. I've got to get home. And as I stood up to leave, I noticed I was a little drunk, and I didn't need to be driving. And there weren't, Lyft and Uber and all those sort of things around back then. So I got up to look for some of my friends that had been in the house asking for a ride home. And they weren't in the kitchen. They were on the back patio. They obviously weren't in the den where I was. And finally, as I was walking through the back of the house, I heard some voices in a bedroom where the door was sort of cracked, and I opened it up. And when I did, I saw him standing over a dresser with lines of cocaine on it. Now, I had never been around cocaine. That was always sort of the one thing that I had told myself, like, okay, that's the one you do and you never come back from. All the old after school specials or the more you
Yep.
know kind of stuff that used to come on TV. So I kind of went to shut the door, and one of the guys said, "Hey, man, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. We've been hiding this from you forever. We wanted to get to know if we could trust you. Obviously, we can. But if you want to continue hanging out with us, you need to try one of these. And I heard you say you can't really drive home, and this is like drinking a cup of coffee. It'll wake you up." Now, I'd never been a coffee drinker in my life. I had a sip of my dad's black coffee when I was like 4, decided I never wanted it again. So I didn't know what that meant. They were saying it'll wake you up and you can drive. I should have turned around and walked out of that place at that time, but this is what I'm getting to about what we spoke about a minute ago about doing the things other people want you to do and becoming who people want you to be.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be left out. I didn't want to lose friends. I didn't want to be alone again. So I walked in and I leaned over and I took a line of cocaine. I immediately felt like I could run through a wall. I remember walking back out and sitting on the couch and sort of wigging out, just sort of rubbing my shoulders and moving and looking around. And everything was hyper focused and my heart was kind of beating really fast. And I kept thinking, what have I done? What have I done? And it just felt it was disappointing everybody in my life, my parents and everything else, even though I'd done all these other drugs, this one for some reason really rang bells. So after about an hour, my heart slowed back down. I got up, I drove home, and the whole way home, I started making promises like, "Oh man, I'll never do that again. I'll never, go around those guys again. All those things." Well, the phone started ringing on that next Friday, and I was right back hanging out with those guys again at a different house. This time when I walked in, it wasn't in some back bedroom. It was right there on the coffee table, and there were lines everywhere. Again, I should have walked away, but I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to be without friends again in my life. I wasn't going to church or any of those things. I'd walked away from that. So I went in and did a bunch of cocaine that night. I think we did it till 5 or 6 in the morning. And it became a regular thing in my life. All these what my friend Dr. Bob Schutz would call unholy vows. I started making in my life. I'll never buy it. I'll never have the guy's number. I'll never do it on a weeknight. I'll never, do it myself. All those things started falling one by one. And I found myself doing cocaine almost every night. We would go out to bars looking for women and things like that. But eventually, we got to the point where we were doing so much, we would just sit in the house and drink and do drugs. And we quit going out and we became very reclusive. It was a very dark and lonely. And even though I was around people, I really wasn't. The drugs were the center of our relationship and of our attention. I became very lonely. I didn't have any girls in my life. I developed an addiction to pornography in that time of my life that also followed me for a very long time, and was very hopeless for quite a while in that period of my life.
How many years was this going on, the heavy drug use specifically?
17 years of my life is where it followed me through my marriage and everything, and we can get into that too. But
Sure, but
yeah,
off and
yeah.
on, you were trying to kick it. You got away from those friends, I'm assuming. You weren't necessarily with the same group for 17 years.
No, honestly, that's that's not exact. We hung out for a while. Now, some of those men peeled off. They started getting jobs and realized I got to grow up and all those things. But there was a core of 3 or 4 of us that we just kept doing that. Now, in the midst of this, I had moved up in our company from being a warehouse manager to now an outside salesman. By the time I was 24, 25 years old, I dropped out of school. I'd gotten goose eggs. My dad said, "I'm not paying for this stuff anymore. You can just throw yourself into this job." I did, and I excelled at it, and I became an outside salesman. And before you know it, I was making over $200,000 a year before I was, 25 years old. I was a Fortune 250 salesman of the year in this company. I was winning the awards every year. I would go to work from 8 to 5 every day, and I was Johnny on the spot. I had all these customers, and I was 100% commission. I was killing it. It was just everybody. I had great relationships with people, and I was a chameleon among men, as I said earlier. I could be anything to anybody. Now, once I from 8 to 5 was over, I was at home every night. I was partying. I started to do a lot of these drugs myself when I wasn't with those other men. I was drinking a lot, doing all those things, and I just kept up the appearances. I had everything. But what society would tell you the men should have, I had it all.
Yep.
Money, a car, house, job, all those things, recognition and prestige. But I was a broken mess inside. And pretty soon after that, some of those relationships started falling away. It was mainly me doing this with a couple of guys and myself. And I was praying to the Lord, which, as much as what that meant in my life at the time, which was really like, God, I need something. Would you please show up and give it to me? That was a relationship I had with Jesus. I had totally lost my faith. Um, so I'd ask him to send, some girls in my life. I was lonely again. I just want to have a girlfriend again in my life. And one night I walked into a bar with some of those friends and we were going to party. I had a pocket full of cocaine. We were sitting down in there to start drinking and start the, traveling trail of where we were going to go that night to different bars and party. And a bunch of those guys left early that night. I was sitting there with one or two of them. And this beautiful girl came in that I knew in college. She actually dated one of my friends that I used to do a lot of the drugs with. They had broken up 5 years earlier. I was there when they had broken up. And I'd seen her a couple times lately, but she didn't speak to me. I didn't know why. But this night she sent a girl over the table and she said, "Hey, this girl over here," I knew the girl. She had played volleyball with my little sister, the girl she sent to the table. And so she said, John, this girl at this table over here wants to talk to you. And I knew her. I was like, Angela? And she goes, yeah, you know her? And I go, yeah. And she goes, I don't think she knows you. I said, we knew each other all in college. I looked a little different and put on weight, all those things. So she goes back over and tells her, and all of a sudden she waves me over anyway. So I go there with this attitude of, this is my buddy's ex-girlfriend, and she hasn't spoken to me the last 2 times I saw her. So what does she want? You know, I sat down and said, hey, Angela, nice to see you. What do you want? You know, which was not the pickup line for women, by the way. You know, obviously been a long time since I'd talked to women. And she said, I just want to talk to you. And pretty soon I realized she was interested in me. And we wound up talking that night for hours. My buddies left, you know, and I sat there with her. I asked her out the next night. We started to date, and then we eventually got married. Now, she was Catholic, and she told me in one of those conversations that the man she was going to marry was going to be Catholic. So I thought I was the man for the job. So I went right down to the nearest RCIA class and signed right up and went through there, never really wanting to become Catholic, but wanting to marry her. And this whole time of dating for a year and all these things, I was still doing the drugs. I did enough to where it kept me satiated, but it wasn't enough to set off any sort of warning signs to her. I wanted to tell her, but I was afraid she would leave me and I'd be lonely again. I was a coward. It's what I tell people a lot about drugs and alcohol and addictions is we're all innately selfish due to the fall. But when you add all these addictions and substances and things like that in there, it puts it into overdrive, and all you think about is yourself. So I was worried that I'd be lonely again. I'd be left alone, that she would leave me. So I didn't tell her. I was actually doing drugs until 7 in the morning the night we got married. The night before we got married. Not long after that, you know, we moved into a home together, you know, after we were married and started to live life. I was hiding those things from her still. Not long after that, she came and told me, she said, John, I'm pregnant, which I've been wanting so badly. I wanted to be a father. I wanted to be the father that I wish my father had been for me. Don't get me wrong. My father he wears a cape in my eyes still, but he wasn't around a lot. He was working all the time and trying to provide, and he didn't spend much time. He would teach me something, but wouldn't spend much time playing with me or doing that thing with me. So I wanted to be different. And I'd made vows in my early childhood, in my youth, that when I'm a father, I'm going to be different. So I couldn't wait, and I was hoping it'd be a boy because I didn't know what to do with a girl and all those things. And so luckily, she tells me that we're going to have a boy, and we do. Now the whole time as she's pregnant, I'm wanting to tell her the truth again because as we conceived, I was doing these drugs, but I was a coward. I was afraid to. I didn't want her to leave me. And so I kept it a secret, and I kept doing the drugs and kept thinking, well, I'll eventually mature. Like something will happen in life. I'll eventually mature. And luckily, you know, I'm happy to say that my son Jacob, he's 14 now, that he was born perfectly healthy and was a gift from God. You know, he was a joy to be around. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to be a great father. But the selfishness outweighed that. I was a good father when I wanted to be, but I threw myself into work to fuel what I really was looking for in my life: notoriety and power and money and all these things that society tells men that we have to be worthy of something, right? That's where our worth is found. So I dove into all of that. And yeah, it was just another dark period in my life because I wanted to be this good father, but I had these addictions that were pulling me away from all of that. And I wasn't really the father I should have been.
Let me ask you, so you went through RCIA, you were
Yeah.
officially Catholic. Were you
Yeah.
going to mass with your wife, or what was that relationship like with the church at that time?
Yeah, I was in the beginning. You know, I wanted to make her happy. I was a little weirded out by all the Catholic stuff, you know, the up, the down, the the repetitiveness of all of it. It was just very different than being a Baptist. And my RCA class was like what a lot of them could be around the country. It was an older man. I don't know if he was a deacon or not. He never wore his clerics. But when we went in there, he kind of said, okay, you want to be Catholic? Why do you want to become Catholic? I was like, I want to marry her. And he made some joke, you know, just like, oh, well, you're like everybody else in here.
Hmm.
And then he said, basically, well, if you want to become Catholic, then you should know we don't worship statues. We don't worship Mary. And he went through some other things. And he said, you know, you should show up the next, you'll show up the next 8 months worth of Tuesdays, and we'll teach you about the faith, and we'll grow in fellowship together and all those things in formation. And then you'll have a beautiful candlelight vigil mass on Easter Sunday if you stay with it. And then, you know, you'll become part of the church and you'll be Catholic. What he should have said is you'll show up the next 8 months of Tuesdays, and you'll learn the faith, or at least what we could teach you in that amount of time, and then you'll show up for a beautiful candlelight vigil, and then no one will ever speak to you again, because that was my experience in the Catholic Church. We went to 5. here in Memphis, and we wanted to move out east where the schools were because we knew we wanted to have children. And so we were looking at all these churches with schools, these parishes with schools. And every Sunday we'd go in and my wife would say, "Is this it? Is this the one? Is this the one?" And I'd say no. And then finally, after about 4 or 5 of them, she goes, "You just don't want to be Catholic." Now, that was probably true to some extent. It was true in my life. But the thing I said to her was, "Angela, we've been to five Catholic parishes. I'm 6'8". I walked into these parishes and no one ever spoke to me. I know they saw me. I'm a big dude. Like, I know they saw me, but no one ever spoke to me. I'm not used to this. The churches I went to, like, if you pulled up in a car and you got out in the parking lot, somebody'd have your social security number. You'd have 5 new best friends. They'd have your email address. You'd be invited to 17 birthday parties before you made it in the door. Right. I said, this is unusual. This is different. And no one speaks. We just walk in here and do this thing. And then it's kind of together, but not. But it is, but it isn't. And then we leave and that's it. And so I didn't have that fellowship that I'd had growing up, and I longed for that. So it kind of made me not like what I was a part of now. But then you throw the drugs and the alcohol in there. And to be honest with you, I was hungover most Sunday mornings. I didn't want to go. Right. I've been up all night partying. So I went under protest. I went just to appease her. I was like a lot of guys in the pews now that we service and deal with and minister to now in our ministry is, why are you in the pews? Well, I'm there because my parents always did it. And I just figure I should too. Or my wife will be mad at me and yell at me every Sunday if I don't go. And it's just easier to go and deal with that, than not to deal with that. Then the other thing is, I want my kids to have some semblance of morality. So I'll just bring them here and hopefully some will rub off. And that's the way it kind of was for me. And it is for so many men out there. So I did go to mass, but I didn't really practice the faith. I didn't pray on my own. I didn't believe that was Jesus in the Eucharist, in the Blessed Sacrament. I just went along with it because I wanted to be married. I'm not proud of that. I'm ashamed of that. But I also can look back and realize my ignorance and the place
Yeah.
I was in my life then, and that this was all part of God's journey and his calling of me back to understanding the truth of what all this was and calling me into the beauty of the faith.
Yep. So
You
you're
know,
raising your boy. What was going on with the marriage at that point? So when you mentioned partying, so you would just tell your wife, "Hey, um, you got our boy. I'll see you later." Or how were you able
well,
to have both, family
sure.
life and then have this party scene going on?
Yeah, so a lot of times it was a party of one. It was me, and I was sneaking into the restroom, and taking a line here or there, or waiting till she ran on an errand and doing a little bit of drugs. And, I was drinking and I would always, she would see that part of it. She never knew about the drugs, not until the end of which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But I still went out and met, buddies of mine at the bar on Tuesday nights because what we'd always done. And it's funny, that's what I tell guys when they go, what's the hardest part of being married? And I'm like, well, you figure out pretty quickly how selfish you are, because I thought I could still do the same things I always
Yep.
did as a single guy being married. And pretty quickly I found out that was not okay, but also caused strife in the marriage because I wanted that. I was selfish. What do you mean I can't go out on Tuesday night and have a couple beers with my buddies? Like, I didn't know that was part of this. I don't know. I would have signed up for it if that was. I was just very selfish and stupid, about all this stuff. It's self-centered. So, a lot of times I started doing the drugs on my own, just at the house, and I do enough to get me going and just make me feel good. But wasn't deep diving into that until the next thing right here happened in my life. My mother came to us and called my sisters. I had a younger and an older sister. And called us together, and she had contracted breast cancer several years before, and she'd been in remission. And so she comes to us, and she said she hadn't been feeling good, and she'd been sharing that with us, and we were worried about the cancer. But it turned out she had 3 blockages in her heart, and so she had a decision to make. At the time, she was still on some chemo for the breast cancer, and the doctors basically told her, "Okay, you either stop the chemo and have the heart surgery, or you're going to have a heart attack at some point. You're literally going to have a heart attack, and it could be any time. Or you stay on the chemo and you wait, and see if you can get through the chemo and then have the surgery. But you could have a heart attack at any time. If you get off the chemo, the cancer could spread and go anywhere in an instant." So my mother chose to have the surgery. Everything seemed fine. Well, shortly after that, things started to get a little worse. Her being off the chemo allowed the cancer to spread. Now, as I told you, I was very selfish. My mother and father always wanted me around, but I was always too busy. I was either working and making money, or I was partying or whatever. I was just really into my life and my family and what I was doing. I never went to any doctor's appointments with my mother except for one, the last one that she really went to. I was up here in my territory driving around making sales calls one day. I knew my parents were up here from Mississippi where they had retired. They still had a home in Memphis they were trying to sell, but they were up here at a cancer appointment for her. So I just had this inclination, just go over there and see your mom. You know, you haven't seen her in a few weeks. You know, she's at the doctor. So I did. Luckily, they were still there. I go into the doctor's office. They said, yeah, she's in room, whatever, go see her. So I go back there. I open the door. My mother's just, overwhelmed with surprise because she couldn't believe I was there. I never took the time to go to appointments with her or any of that stuff. I just was simply too busy doing my thing. So I walk in and she's like, John, 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 and she's giving me a hug, and my, unemotional father was just sort of like, son, that kind of thing. And so all of a sudden we're hugging and all that stuff. The doctor walks in and she says, you must be John. I've heard a lot about you. It's nice to finally meet you, but I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. Pretty quickly, she turns and looks at my mother and says, Miss Edwards, we knew that when you stopped the chemo to have the heart surgery, there was danger of the cancer spreading. I'm sorry to tell you that it has. It's moved from your lymph nodes, from your breast and your lymph nodes into your lungs and now into your brain. And you have maybe 2 weeks to a month to live. Um, I've told this story 1,000 times, and this is still a very, very difficult part to share. But I just looked over and said, what? Like, what did you say? And my mother just kind of had this weird look of peace on her face. My father started to cry immediately, which I had maybe seen for half a second once in my life. And then he did what we do as men, which I'm fine, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And my mother said, thank you for your care and thank you for taking care of me. We're going to go home and then we're going to head down to our farm to discuss this. And the doctor just basically said, let me know if you have any questions, how we can help. We can get you set up with hospice, all that stuff. So I'm sitting there. My mother said, just John, follow us to our house in Midtown, the house I grew up in for 40 years of my life, and all those things. And, had been a big part of my life. I go and I meet them there, and my dad goes in the house to get clothes to take to the farm, and I just go and open the door of my mother's car, and I fall into the passenger side of it, into her lap, all 6'8" and 270 pounds of me just in her lap, and I start sobbing and crying. Mom, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to die. This isn't right. This isn't fair. Jacob's only 8 months old. He's never going to remember you. He's not going to know you. I need you. Like, you can't go. This isn't right. And she just sat there rubbing my head when I had hair. I joke a lot and tell people my mother rubbed the hair off. That's why I don't have any. But she would rub my head, and try to comfort me. And she'd say, John, it's okay. I know Jesus. I've loved him my whole life. I've had a relationship with him. I knew this could be a part of this. I knew this could be a possibility in my life. So it's okay. I'm prepared for this. And I'm going to go and be with my parents and Jesus and everyone in heaven. And I'm looking forward to that day. And I was just like, I looked up and said, what? Like, I don't want to hear that. It's not going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. Like, how can we live without you? What's going to happen to dad? He's going to be a mess. And all this stuff. And it was me, I. Everything I said, looking back at it, was about me. It wasn't really a concern for her. And so all of a sudden, my dad comes out of the house, and I just didn't want any piece of that. So he got in the car with the clothes, and I said, what am I supposed to do? And my mom said, well, can you please call your sisters and tell them, which was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. And then she said, and we're going to go to the farm and we're going to spend some time, your father and I, we're going to figure this out, and then we'll be in touch. And so I watched him pull out of the driveway and this turned around to this house I'd lived in for, half of my life at the time. And I just walked up to this porch and kicked it as hard as I could. And I looked up at the sky and I said, God, I hate you. I hate you. Like, if this is the type God you are, if you're going to take someone who has served you so impeccably and loved you as well as my mother has, and is innocent and has lived a good life, if you're going to take her life, but leave a lying scumbag, drug addict, piece of garbage like me here, then I'll never worship you again in my life. I hate you. I hate you. I mean it. I was dropping F-bombs. I was doing all kind of unsightly things. I mean, I was cussing him out and just saying, I'll never worship you again. And I meant every word of it. So I go home. I tell my wife cries, I cry. And then I start doing the God thing again, right? I'm fine. I don't need anything. Well, pretty soon after that, my mother died. I was in the room when she passed. And people that say that they don't believe people have souls or whatever, they don't know what they're talking about, because I was in the room and I stepped around the corner outside the door to get a bottle of water. And when I had stepped out, my mother was looking at me and I heard her say, John, I love you. And then when I heard my sister scream as I turned the corner to come back, and my mother was looking at me and there was no life in her eyes. The light had just simply left her eyes. It was a painful time. I just went off the rails. I didn't know how to handle it. I started drinking 20, 30 beers a night. I was doing 40 or $50 worth of cocaine a night. I had the perfect alibi. My wife thought he doesn't know how to deal with his mother dying and all those things. And all she saw was the drinking. So she probably thought, and she's told me this, she thought, okay, he's just going to have a period of this and then he'll get over it. Like he'll just get through it. He'll reach out for something different. Well, soon after that, my wife came to me and said, I'm pregnant, which surprised me because as Jacob had been born, as these things happened with my wife, with my mother, we had sort of drifted apart. We were kind of like ships passing in the night. You know, we would spend time with Jacob, cook dinner. She'd put him to bed. She'd ask for my time. I wouldn't give it. She'd go to sleep and I'd sit up and do drugs and drink and then watch porn basically. So all of a sudden she comes to me, she tells me she's pregnant. I'll have this urge to tell her again, oh my gosh, I'm doing more drugs than I ever have. Like we were in our late 30s. She had an issue with blood clots that her aunt had a stroke a few months before, and she'd been tested and had the same thing. So this pregnancy was going to be difficult. She was going to have to go for weekly checkups. And I just thought, you got to tell her. But I was a coward, man. I cared only about myself. I didn't want to lose everything. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to lose the money, the power, the notoriety, all that stuff more than my wife and my children. I'm ashamed to say that, but that's the truth. And so she says this and I want to tell her the truth, but I can't. The devil was speaking to me, just like, hey, just keep this lie. You'll be able to keep this and you'll eventually stop. It'll go away. But it didn't. My daughters were born. They got healthy. I have identical twin, red-haired, blue-eyed girls, Caitlin and Allison. They're 11 years old and they're a gift of my life, just like my son. But I went off the rails, man. And every night I was sitting up till 2 o'clock in the morning. My wife's taking care of these twins, taking care of Jacob, and I was sitting there at 2 o'clock in the morning doing blow and drinking and watching porn, sitting up there with baseball reruns on ESPN. So if she came up there, she would think I was doing something. But she'd given up a long time and just started going to bed. And, it was just a difficult time. So these 2 nights in a row, this gets to the really turning point of the story. I'm sitting up there and at 2 o'clock in the morning, I decided I'm going to go to work. I'm going to go to bed. Now I had all kind of work stress from being a 100% commission sales guy. I had customers that were hammering me all the time. I was drinking to deal with it. All this stuff could be pulled out from under me at any time. So one of those nights I'm sitting there at 2 in the morning and I get up, I put away the stuff, the drugs, all those things. I engage in pornography the way that I had every night, basically. And I go back to my bedroom, take a shower, then get into bed. Now, for those, I hope nobody listening to this ever has done cocaine, but it's very hard to go to sleep, especially when you've been doing as much as I had. So I was dreading the 3 hours I was going to have to lay there before I went to sleep for an hour and I had to get up and go to work. So I lay in bed, and for some reason, I fall asleep in about 10 minutes. But about 10 minutes later, I wake up and my heart's blowing out of my chest. I literally sit up in the bed and was like, what's going on? Well, I fell out of the bed. I landed on all fours. I had the wherewithal to look up to see if my wife had woken up, but she hadn't. She was still asleep. I crawled into the bathroom. I shut the door, pulled myself up on the commode, and I started rocking back and forth and shaking, going, no, 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 no. This is it. This is it. I'm going to have an overdose. I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to die. And I felt myself wanting to call out to Angela, but I was a coward. I was afraid. I was like, if I call out to her, she's going to call an ambulance. They're going to take my blood. She'll see that I've been doing the drugs. She'll finally have her answer. I was never physically abusive to her. I was always verbally, and nothing was ever good enough. Why'd you do that? Why did you do this? Why'd you make that decision? Why don't you ever think about these things? That's the way that I spoke to her. I was very verbally abusive. And so I knew she would have her answer, then she would leave. She would take the kids, she would take the house, she would take the money. My whole world would come crumbling down. So I sat there in that bathroom and I felt myself wanting to call out to God, but I was so obstinate and I was so stubborn. I hated him and I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of asking for his help. So instead, I just thought, you know what? Maybe this is the easy way out. Maybe I'll just die here and I don't have to explain anything. I get the free ticket out of here. Right. And I don't have to tell her what's really been going on in my life. Like I said, I was a coward. So I took this towel, I threw it around my face, and I thought, well, at least if I die, I'll die quietly. And so as I put that towel around my face, I noticed my breathing started to slow. And I thought, okay, I'm having a panic attack. So as my breathing slowed, I sat there, I got up finally, and I went and I laid down in bed and I said, okay, I'll never do that again. I'll throw the drugs out tomorrow. And I did. I got up the next morning, I threw the drugs out, I put the beer away, and I went to work. 4:30 the next afternoon, I was back buying the drugs again. I was back at the dealer's house. I bought them again. Same thing. Next night, 2 in the morning, drinking, doing drugs, watching porn, go to bed, take a shower, go to bed. fall asleep for 10 minutes, wake up again after 10 minutes, my heart's blowing out of my chest, fall out of the bed on all fours, crawl to the bathroom. My wife didn't wake up again. And I'm sitting there on the commode, same thing. No, 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 no. And eventually it hit me. I was like, this is the second strike. I don't know that I'll get three. And all I wanted to do, Eddie, was to tell somebody the truth in my life. Like that's people ask me all the time, what's the worst part of being an addict? Is it the withdrawal? Is all that? Yeah, that part stinks. It's not fun. The withdrawal is you feel like you're going to die during withdrawal. I mean, it's horrible, but it's not worse than the other part of it, which is the lying. The lying was the worst part of it. I couldn't ever remember what I told anybody, and you were like building a house of cards. Hey, John, remember the other day when you said this? What did I say? What did I say? What did I? Because if you say one wrong thing, here it all comes falling down. All I wanted to do was tell somebody the truth of my life. Now, I had been to confession one time. I've been Catholic for 11 years. I was 37 years old at this point. And so all I wanted to do was tell somebody the truth of my life. And I thought, okay, in that RCIA class, I went to confession that one time. There's a men's conference in my diocese coming up this weekend. My father-in-law was uber Catholic. He invited me and my brother-in-law to this men's conference that had been going on for years in Memphis forever. And we always found reasons not to go. But as I sat on that commode on the verge of thinking I was going to die, I sat there going, okay, that men's conference is this weekend. And I don't want to go for any other reason, but except there are going to be 40 priests there. And I could probably find one that I don't know and tell them the truth. And if I remember correctly, he can't tell anybody. And so I thought that's what I'll do. So I woke up the next morning. I threw out the drugs. I told my wife I'm going to go to this men's conference. She had this look of hope in her eyes, and I did. I don't remember who spoke that year or anything like that, but it came time for confession, and I went down this hallway, and it was basically like 30 doors in a school with priests in every room. And I was going, nope, I know him, and nope, I know him, and nope, I know him, and nope, I know him. Finally, I found one that was from out of town somewhere. I don't know why he was there, but he was from Mississippi, and he was there. So I opened door number 40 or whatever, and I could go in and sit down. And there's this priest, and he's looking at me. He's overweight and angry and crotchety looking, and he looks like he's tired of being there. And I thought, man, I really wish I'd opened another door. But I sit down, and he said, begin. Now, I didn't know how to go to confession. I'd only been once. So I just looked back at him, and I said, begin. And he looked at me again, and he goes, begin. And I said, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. And he kind of got angry. He's like, oh. And so he led me through it. And all of a sudden, I started to confess everything. And for the first time in my life, I started crying and really just like pouring it out about everything that I had done wrong. This priest looked like he was getting hit with body shots. I mean, I was telling him all these lies that I had, and he was just kind of looking more and more appalled as I shared it with him. And finally, I came to the end and I said, look, here, I just want to be a better husband and father. I want to be the husband and father that I should have been for my family. I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of the way I've treated them. They've deserved so much better. And I just want help. I can't stop this on my own. I said, I want God to help me change my life, but I don't want to get in trouble. And that's when he lost it. He said, what do you mean you don't want to get in trouble? You don't get to tell God how his mercy is delivered. Do you want his mercy or not? Are you serious about that or not? And he's screaming at me, and I'm already crying. I'm thinking, man, I can't cry anymore. Quit yelling at me, you know? And so I got what he was saying. He's like, you need to take this seriously. And so I did. I said, yes, I want to change my life. So he gave me absolution. I went home that Saturday evening. I poured out the drugs that I had left over. I threw out the beer. My wife probably thought this was like finally a hallelujah moment, you know? And I made it 4 days. That next week was Holy Week. And Monday morning, I went to work. It was hard. I had 4 days worth of just shaking and withdrawals and all that stuff. And, you know, was really having trouble masking all that. I didn't believe I could do it. And I got all the way to Holy Thursday. I had a customer that was rebuilding their shop. They were adding on to their shop, and I was going to sell them about $400,000 worth of merchandise and equipment and all this stuff. So they come back to me. I get a phone call that Thursday, and they say, John, we decided you get the sale. So bring us an invoice, sign it, and it's all yours. So I shot down to that part of Mississippi in my territory. They signed the invoice here on Holy Thursday, and I thought I'm going to make more money on this episode. I mean, not this episode, sorry, this sale than I ever have in my life. And so I started going, okay, this is awesome. And I started headed home. I was supposed to be picking up my son for my father-in-law's in Germantown. And all of a sudden I thought, I need to celebrate. And what that meant for me was I needed to do drugs and drink a little bit today. And I thought, well, you promised Jesus you wouldn't do that again. And the other side of me said, well, just this one time, just this one little bit. I mean, you just had a big day. You made all this money. You should celebrate. So I go to call this dealer about 30 times. He doesn't answer. I get all the way out to the other side of Memphis where my father-in-law lived to pick up my son. And the dealer calls back and he says, John, hey, sorry, man, I was asleep. Come on back. So I turn the car around and I drive all the way back down there. I run in, I get $40 worth of cocaine. I go out to my car, I look down, it's on zero gas. I had a digital gas gauge, it said zero. I was not in a nice part of town. So I just like, let me get to a gas station. Let me get to a gas station. I did. I pulled up to a gas pump and I thought, okay, man, great, I made it. As soon as I put it in park, turned the engine off, I heard whoop, whoop. And I looked behind me and the DEA was behind me. They'd been watching his house. Next thing you know, they pull me out of the car. They start yelling, "Where are the drugs?" They find them in my sock. They throw me in the back of a Tahoe, take me down to the organized crime unit, chain me to a bench, start asking me all these questions, and I wouldn't say anything. Next thing you know, a uniformed patrol officer comes in and gets me, throws me in the back of a police car, and he starts taking me to downtown jail in downtown Memphis, one of the most dangerous cities in the United States, and one of the most dangerous jails. I hadn't talked to my wife in 3 or 4 hours. Last she heard I was going to get Jacob, I never showed up. So I'm sitting in the back of this police car, and these two officers are arguing because they're about to get off work, and now they're in the line. They're having to wait to drop me off with all these other criminals that people are dropping off and these offenders and stuff. One of them looks up in the rearview mirror and he goes, "Man, you don't ever look like you've been in trouble in your life." I said, "I hadn't. I made some bad choices. I got addicted, and this is all I want to do is call my wife. Like she doesn't know what's happened to me. She doesn't deserve this." And the guy looked in the rearview mirror, and I'll never forget this. He goes, "Well, your phone's in the trunk. I can't uncuff you, but I can call her, and you can tell her where you are." And I immediately I said, "Well, I don't know what I'll say. I don't know what I would tell her." And he looked at me. I'll never forget his eyes in the rearview mirror. He said, "Son, is this about you or is it about her?" And my whole life had been about me. I said, "Get the phone." So he gets the phone, he calls her, she answers, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, John, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Are you okay? What's happened? Where are you?" And I said, "Angela, I'm in the back of a police car in downtown Memphis. I've been arrested on a felony charge of cocaine." And she said, "I hate you." And she hung up the phone. You know, she had her answer. She knew something had been going on. She knew it was more than my mother dying. And she had her answer, and I didn't blame her. I had to turn my attention to what was going to go on in this jail cell. So they take me in there. They take everything of mine that I could have, my belt, my watch, my wallet, all those things. I'm in my regular, I'm still in my clothes from work. I go into this drunk tank. Within minutes, I see a guy stab a guy with another. I see a bailiff beat that guy within an inch of his life. Sit there till 4 in the morning. Hadn't eaten or slept in 24 hours. They take the mug shots, and that's when it became real to me. I'm not going to get out of this just because I'm a salesman. I'm not going to talk my way out of this. This everybody's going to know. So they take me back to get my scrubs and what I could have in the jail cell in that moment. And there's a phone there. They said, "You can call somebody if you want to." Called my wife. She answered, and it was 4 in the morning. She said, "John, I know where you are, and I don't care. I've got to go to work and get the kids to school because you're not here and because you've screwed up our lives." And so I hang up the phone. I go over, I get the scrubs and all the things I can have in my life, go down to a cell block, and I'm just I say praying, but basically hoping that I was going to be in a cell by myself. And luckily I was. They tell me to turn around, and I watch this iron door open up. I go in, turn around holding the toilet paper and the toothbrush and the blankets I could have, and that's it. And I watched that door just do, boom, and slam shut. And I thought, that's it. This is since I was a kid. I can't go anywhere. I can't eat when I want to. If I want to go to the bathroom, it's in front of God and everybody. I'm stuck here. I didn't realize I was claustrophobic until that moment. I was in this 8 by 8 cell, maybe at the most, and these two disgusting bunk beds. And so I took one of the blankets. This was a mercy looking back. I had two blankets. I took one and threw it over the mattress on the bottom bunk, and I laid down face first and pulled the other blanket over me, and just by the grace of God, I passed out. Well, I woke up the next morning, and I was still under that blanket face first, and I thought I was at home in bed. I thought I had a nightmare. Then I sat up, and my head hit the bottom of a steel bunk bed. And I realized I was in jail, and I threw my legs over the side of the thing, and I started rubbing back and forth, going, "No, no, 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 no." And I started feeling that feeling again. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. And then all of a sudden, the strangest thing happened, Eddie. Like I had no reason to feel this at all in my life, but this incredible peace came over me in the midst of thinking I'm going to lose my wife, my kids, my house, the car, the money, my reputation, everything. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to be myself. And I was contemplating suicide in that moment. I was looking around, actively looking around the cell for something to take my life. I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth. But in the moment of all that freaking out, this strange peace came over me. And from my own gut and out of my own mouth, I heard the words, "At least now I don't have to lie anymore." At least now everybody will know who I am. That had been the worst part of all of it, is just one day I knew people were going to find out. And I didn't know how that was going to happen. And it was a worry and a stress in my life every day. I had gotten to the point I knew I couldn't give it up on my own. And so here I was, those words came out of my mouth, and I just started to sob and I started to cry. And I hit my knees and I just thought, how did I get here? How did I get here? How did all this go so wrong? And pretty quickly, Jesus showed up, and not in some figure or form or apparition, but just a voice in my own soul that said, it was the day that you left me. It was the day you turned away from me and you walked away from your faith. And I just started to cry and to bawl and just thought, Lord, please, please, I don't want this to be my life. I don't want this to happen. My wife and kids deserve so much better than what I've become. I should have kept my promise to you in that confessional. I should have done the things that I told you I would do. I'm so sorry, and I don't know that if you can ever find it in your heart to give me another chance. I don't know if I'm even worth it, but I don't know. Look where I've gotten myself on my own. I can't do this on my own anymore. I don't know what, if you're interested in the least bit, but if you are, I'll give you my life. I don't even know what it means anymore. Just take it. It's yours. Look what I've done with it. I've wasted it. I will do whatever you want if you'll give me an opportunity to be with my wife and kids again and give me a second chance. And I sat there crying and sobbing like that until the bailiff showed up. And she opened the door and she said, you can make a phone call. I called everybody that I knew in my life, all those brothers for life, that I'd spent thousands of dollars on in my fraternity. Not a single one of them answered the phone. I called my wife. I called my sisters. I called my dad. Nobody answered the phone. It was so excruciatingly lonely and fearful. I thought, I'm going to be stuck in here forever. Nobody's going to come get me. Well, finally, my sister answered at my dad's farm. And she said, John, we know where you are. Angel's across the street bailing you out, which I did not believe would be the case. I mean, she just means what she said, and I didn't think she would do that. She said she's not going to let you come home. I'm going to come up there this evening. You should be out by 9 o'clock tonight. And I'm going to come get you, and you're going to have to go by the house. She won't be there. She's taking the kids to her parents. You'll have to get some clothes. You'll have court on Monday, and then I'm going to take you to Dad's for Easter, and then we're going to figure the rest out. And she said, but you're going to be in there about 9 o'clock. Now, this was Good Friday. So I get off that phone and I go back to the cell, and I said, at least now I know something's going to happen. And I began to pray, something I'd not done in a long time in my life. And I just said, Lord, please, please start to work on me. Please start to show me what it is that you think I can do for you. Pretty quickly, he took me back to all of those vacation Bible school camps and all of those evangelization moments and all of those, mission trips and overseas and all that stuff I'd done. He's like, this is the person I made you to be. This is the person I made you to be. And I kept thinking things like, well, I'm Catholic now. Like, how can I do that? There's priests and deacons. And he's like, you don't worry about that. Like, you don't worry about any of that. You just worry about surrendering yourself to me. So that whole afternoon, I sat there on Good Friday praying to the Lord. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they come get me and they say, you've got two visitors. So I show up in this room that looks like what you see on TV with the glass and the payphones. It's my mother-in-law and my wife. And they were crying. I was crying. And I started to do what I always did as a salesman, explain myself. And I got about 2 words out, and my wife put her hand up to the glass like that and said, stop. And I thought, here it comes. I'm going to lose everything. She's going to divorce me. She's going to leave me. Next thing you know, she says, John, I'm not going to divorce you, but it has nothing to do with you and everything. Everything to do with the vows I made to God in the church that day. All I heard was, I'm not going to divorce you. She said, you can't come home except to get clothes. I'm not going to be there. Your sister's going to get you tonight whenever they let you out. She's going to take you to your father's. And then I don't know what's going to happen after that. You'll have court on Monday, and then we got to figure out, that, but I can't talk about that right now. And she got up, and my mother-in-law said, John, we're going to try to get you some help. But she left. So I went back to my cell. I continued to pray, and it was about 9 o'clock that night. They came and got me and said, all right, you're released. And they gave me my phone. My work had found out. I had 15 missed calls from my boss. Apparently there's a magazine called Just Busted in Memphis, and my picture was on the front of it. And so they knew about it. And that was a heavy weight to have to deal with as I walked out of the jail. I looked up and I started looking for my sister, and it wasn't my sister. It was my father. My father, I didn't have a great relationship with. My father that had always been very punishing and domineering and very impatient and reacted with, you messed up, you got punished. And so here I was, 6'8", 270 pounds, and 37 years old, and he was, pushing 80 and overweight and 6 feet. As soon as I started walking towards the car, he comes off the thing like he's 30 years old, and I thought, man, here we go. Like, just turn your head and take it. Like, whatever he's going to do, if he slaps you, if he grabs you, like, just take it. You deserve it. And next thing you know, he grabbed me by the shirt and he pulled me towards him, and I just had my eyes sort of shut. And he grabbed me and he pulled me into his chest and he said, "Son, I love you." It was the first time I can ever really remember my father telling me he loved me. He said, "Come on, let's get you to your house. Let's get some clothes and we're going to go down to the farm." And in that car ride, Eddie, we talked about my mother, something he never wanted to do. He just wouldn't talk about those things. He was struggling. He quit going to church after, from the moment she died. It was very hard for him. So he starts to share that stuff. And he starts to ask me, "John, was I a terrible father? Was I a terrible husband? Was there something that the way I lived as your father or a father figure or to your mother that caused this?" It was very hard because I was like, "No, it's not your fault. You weren't always the dad that I wanted, but Dad, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm a grown man. I made my own decisions, right? I chose all of this." And so we get down to the farm, and that Saturday, I got out of jail on Holy Friday, and then I'm down at my dad's farm on Good Friday, and then I'm down at my dad's farm on Holy Saturday. And I spent it like the church does, in silence, like in wonder, in not knowing, in confusion, and not knowing what was going to come next. And I woke up Sunday morning and I had this desire to go to mass, something I'd never felt as a Catholic before. And so I borrowed my dad's car and I went to this Catholic room in Bruce, Mississippi, where my parents were from. It was not even big enough to take up a building. It was literally a room. They had a priest that traveled 4 parishes in neighboring towns. The only reason I knew that is because one Christmas 5 years before, I wanted to go to my dad's, and Angela said the only way we're going is if we find a way to go to mass for Christmas. And so we went to this little room, and so I knew it existed. So I borrowed his car. I went down there. I pulled up at Easter Mass at 11, right, like it said on the website, and nobody was there. And I began to sob and cry. And it was like, God, like, really, the one time I want to go to Mass in my life and nobody's here? It's freaking Easter. Where is everybody? And all of a sudden, this Jeep pulls up, and this sister came out of it. And she was the one that had been there alongside Father when I went to that Christmas Mass. She looked over and saw me, and I was crying and mad. She said, "What's going on with you, son?" I said, "I just want to go to Mass." And she must have thought I was nuts. But she said, "Son, there's too many people. It's Easter. We're down the road, and then the next town over, just 3 miles down the road, we're at the 4-H club. There's too many people. It's Easter. We had to go there. Do you know where it is?" And I said, "Yes, I know exactly where it is. We had family reunions there." So I get in the car and I drive down there walking, and it's packed. It's full of all kind of different people of different, nationalities, all those things. And we're in there, and this priest walks out. It's the same priest. And he gives this beautiful mass. And I'm sitting there and I'm hurting because all these guys have their families around them. And it's hard. And so mass is over. I get up, I walk to the door. They had a potluck afterwards. And I didn't want to stay for that. I wanted to get the heck out of there. And so I go and I go to open the door, and all of a sudden I feel his hand hit my shoulder. And it's this priest. I turn around and he says, "Hello, John." Now, I had never once met that man, spoken to him, told him my name or anything at that Christmas Mass. But he looks at me and says, "Hello, John." And I just kind of had this look on my face, and he goes, "I don't know where your family is and why they're not here with you, but God wants me to tell you that everything's going to be all right." I said, "Excuse me, what did you say?" And he said, "It was good to see you, John. I hope to see you again." And he turned around and he disappeared in the crowd. Now, I'm tall. I could see across the room. I didn't see him again. Guy just disappeared. I go out to the car. I start crying, going, "What was that?" And I realized pretty quickly God was going to give me a second chance in my life. So the next morning, my dad takes me back to Memphis. I go to court. I plead guilty. There was a Catholic judge there that put me on diversion. He wanted to give everybody second chances. That's why he had established that court, to try to give people a chance to rehab and stuff instead of just throwing them in jail again. So I had a chance to do that. I had to go to my job and sit in front of all these people they'd flown in from headquarters because the number one salesman in the country was in trouble and all this stuff. They started to ask me all these questions. And in the middle of those questions, the yes and no answers, I just had this realization that, what am I doing here? Like, yeah, I don't want to lose my job, but like, I haven't spoken to my wife since Friday night. And here we are on Monday, right? And I have no idea what's going to happen in my life. And I guarantee you, she doesn't believe that I can change. So all of a sudden, I got this inclination to go walk out of the room and have my dad drive me to rehab. So I got up in that and I said, "Look, I got to go." And they said, "What do you mean you could lose your job?" "I know I can, but I've never been in trouble. I've made you a lot of money. I've made a lot of money. I can't control what you're going to do. I'm going to go change my life. I got to go to rehab." And so my dad took me down there. One family was worse than the next. They were just bringing kids in that were they were throwing them in the room and saying, "Take them." They stole the car. They got our ATM card and took all our money. They set the house on fire. They were just throwing kids in there. And I had a paper I just pulled up over my head so I didn't have to look at it. Well, all of a sudden the door opened one time and nobody walked by. And I lowered the paper and it was my wife. And she said, "John, I'm mad as heck at you, but I can't let you go through this alone." and she sat with me and she went with me through the period where they assessed where I was and they gave me 30-day outpatient. Well, that night she let me come home. She didn't want my dad driving 4 hours a day for 30 days driving me to rehab. I get home and I realized when I saw my kids how much I was about to have lost. And I just hugged those kids and we just cried and spent hours together. Well, I go back to bed as we come to the end of all of this here of just telling this. I want you to chime in and ask whatever questions you
No,
want at this
I
point.
don't want to stop the flow, man. That was
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
powerful. Keep
So
going.
so I walk in the door and our house, the den where we'd always, that's where we spend our time. Like a lot of families, they have a room that nobody uses called the living room, and then a den where everybody hangs out. That's where we had on the back of our house. And so I was nervous. And Angela told me the reason she let me come home. I'd actually walked out of the rehab center looking for my dad. And she goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for my father." She goes, "I'm not going to make him at 79 years old drive up here back and forth. You're coming home with me." She said, "Besides, Allison, one of our 3-year-old twins, had asked if I was dead. She hadn't seen me in 4 days. It was the longest they'd gone without seeing me. So she said, no, don't get this messed up. You're coming home, but I'm not sleeping in the bed with you. Things are not okay. I don't know when they ever will be, but I can't do this by myself. And I'm not going to divorce you because I'm not going to do that to God." And so we get home, I open the door, and there are these children that I had neglected so much, and they hit me, "Dad, dad, dad, dad." It was like WrestleMania for hours. I mean, just all over each other, sobbing. They were crying. It was a moment I'll never forget in my life. And I held them basically until Angela said it was time to dinner, and then for dinner, and put them to bed. So I go back to my bedroom and I'm laying there, and the devil tried to sneak back into my life at that point. It was just all of a sudden this pride welled up within me. I'm like, okay, I'm in my bed again in my house with air conditioning and a TV and a private bathroom and food and all that stuff. And I just felt the smile come across my face until I looked in the bed next to me and it was empty. I looked across the hall and my side of the bed was perfectly across from the doorway where I could see my wife's body in the bed with Jacob. She was sleeping in there with him. And I thought, what are you smiling at, you idiot? Like, yeah, maybe you could stop drinking, maybe you could stop doing drugs, but you're still a horrible person. Like you're still selfish, you still are angry, you're still hurting, you're still all of these things. What are you smiling at? And all of a sudden, I felt like I wanted to be close to Christ again, like I had been in that jail cell. As a former Protestant, what that meant to me was you grab the word, grab the scriptures, right? That's where I felt close to God. So I opened my bedside table, and I should have opened hers because there was nothing in mine but a book from Father Larry Richards called Be a Man, who he had given my father-in-law to give me at a men's conference in 2011, 5 years before. And I had underlined the first 3 pages of that back then, going to change my life, but it didn't stick. So I should have looked on my wife's side of the room because there were probably 40 Bibles over there. But I grabbed the Father Larry's book and I read it cover to cover that night. My wife woke up at 5 in the morning. She said, "John, what are you doing up?" And I said, "I never went to sleep. I know I got to be better. I know I got to be different. I can't just hope things are going to be better. I've got to put in work. I didn't know how to do it. This book is starting to show me how." So then I started to go to, she didn't really believe me. She's like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." Waiting for the other shoe to drop. She just didn't believe that I was going to be able to change in her heart at the time. And so I had my father-in-law's Tahoe that I was borrowing because my car was still impounded. And I was just driving kids to school every morning and then going to rehab. Well, one day all these customers found out in my life. Just word got out and they started texting me, "I'll never buy from you again." People I've been dealing with for 20 years. And I started crying in the car and thought, this is it. Like, how am I going to support my family? Now, my wife and I are broken. Now I'm not going to be able to support them. Lord, what am I going to do in my life? And I started to cry in the parking lot of the parish and just hit the wheel and go, what have I done to my life? And is life ever going to be different than this? Well, all of a sudden I saw the pastor of my parish walking from the rectory to the church. And I knew he was going to give 8:15 mass. And I thought, you know what? All I want to do is hide from the world, and no one would ever look for me in there. And they were right. It was honest. I mean, I never went to daily mass. I never went to Sunday mass before all this happened. And so I walk into the church. It's me and about 4 elderly people. And I kneel down on the Joseph side of the church and I start to pray in a broken way. Um, Next thing you know, Father processes in. He had no one with him. He was doing mass by himself. He went up, he read the scriptures. And when he started reading the word, I started to cry. Like I didn't even realize I was doing it. I just felt water drip down my eyes. That what he was reading spoke exactly to where I was. Then he went into his homily and he spoke exactly to where I was. And I started to sob. At this point, I was crying pretty uncontrollably loud. And I was frozen in fear of like, I really need to leave, but I really am too frightened to get up and move. Like I'm paralyzed. And so then he goes into the liturgy of the Eucharist. And so it becomes time for communion. And I'm the first person on the Joseph side of the church, on the right side of the church. And he looks at me and I'm looking at him and he says, John, come forward. And I just shook my head no. I didn't feel worthy at all. Even though I'd been to confession, I didn't feel worthy at all. And so he's just nodding his head like, come on, come on. I didn't even know he knew my name. He'd baptized my kids, but that was it. I wasn't involved in the parish really hardly at all. And so he's sitting there and finally he says, John. And so I get up because I'm holding up the line and I walk up there and he looks at me. He says, this is the body of Christ. And when he said it, I looked at him and something was different the way he said it. And when he laid it in my hand, it was like electricity shot all over my body. I just was like, I started weeping uncontrollably. And for the first time in my life, I believed it was him. And so he nods to the blood and I went and partook in the blood. And I go back and I knelt. And I can't explain it other than I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. I can't tell you what I prayed. It just was gibberish. I don't know what it was. It was like my heart was screaming all the stuff that it wanted to say for years. Next thing you know, I feel another tap on my shoulder. I prayed so hard that he had processed out of Mass. Like Mass was over and I never got up off my knees again. Like I didn't even realize what was going on. And so he touched my shoulder and I looked up at this other priest, Father James Martell, and he said, John, what are you doing here? Which was a valid question. I mean, I never went to Mass, let alone on a weekday. And he saw my tears and he goes, come with me. And I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. I deserve Mass. I destroyed Mass. Like I caused this disruption. He's never going to let me come back. And I noticed we were tracking to the confessional. And I thought, I don't want to go in there. Last time I went in there, I got arrested. But we go in there, we sit down, and he says, tell me what's going on. And so I start to confess to him, and I'm trying to beat myself up. Father, you don't know what kind of person I'm. I'm a terrible husband. You don't know how I'm a scumbag. You don't know. There's no hope for me, Father. There's no. And he kept going, John, like, we're not going to do that. You're confessing to me what you've done wrong in your life. The Lord's grace is going to heal that. He's going to help you become a different man. We're not going to talk about that anymore. We're moving past that. So tell me what else is going on. Tell me what else is going on. So we finally go through this and I get up to leave and he says, where do you think you're going after I'd received absolution? And I said, I've only done this twice, but I think I'm supposed to leave. And he said, sit down. He goes, you told me you're on an outpatient process for rehab for the next 30 days and you don't have to be there until 10 in the morning. Is that correct? Yep. Well, did you notice I had no one reading today? I had no one lecturing? I go, I don't know what that means. I had no one reading. I said, okay, yeah, what's your point? He goes, I need somebody, and you're going to be here for the next 30 days. So after this, I'm going to teach you how to lecture. We're going to start learning right after this, and you're going to show up tomorrow and do it the first time. You're going to come to daily Mass every day at 8:15 until I tell you any different, and you're going to go to confession every Friday until I tell you not to, or that you don't have to anymore, that we can space them out a little bit more. That man saved my life. Everything changed. I became a daily communicant, and receiving the Lord in the Eucharist gave me the strength to be a person that he knew I could be and that I was still doubting I could be. This priest took me under his wing. He believed in me. He trusted me. He encouraged me. I read 40 Catholic books that first year. I became on fire for the faith. I started praying every night at 8 o'clock by my bed so the kids would come there and see me before they went to bed and they realized their father was praying. And it was important. I started leading my family to Mass. A year goes by and that men's conference comes back. There was a little unknown priest there named Father Mike Schmitz that was speaking at the time at that conference. He spoke, and I went to that day ready to receive everything for the first time. And so I went to my parish that night, the same parish where Father Martell was, and he had a fundraising event that night, doing 3-point shootout thing to raise money for the school. So I went and I took Jacob. Well, when I got there, there was a guy from our parish that I'd seen at the conference, but I hadn't had a chance to speak with him. Well, he was running around the gymnasium and he was telling everybody his sins. He was screaming, I went to this thing today and it was amazing. And I went to confession, and he hadn't been to confession in 16 years. And he was telling everybody his sins. Now, we were in a mixed crowd. There were some things he was saying there he should have been saying in front of women and children. So I said, Jay, calm down. You can't say that stuff. And he goes, well, I don't understand why I feel this way. And I said, well, I heard you said you've been to confession for the first time in 16 years. You've had an encounter with the Holy Spirit. He goes, I'm cradle Catholic. I know God. I know Jesus. I don't know anything about the Holy Spirit. Tell me what you mean. And so I started to tell him, and I got about 2 minutes into it, and he was sitting there like excited listening, and the devil hit me in the back of the head. He said, what are you doing? Really? You hypocrite? You're going to tell somebody about Jesus? I know you're doing all this stuff, but it's not going to stick. Oh, it's all cute and smoke and mirrors for your wife, but you know you're going to go back to those drugs. You're never going to be more than that. You're never going to be more than a cokehead and a loser and a porn addict and an alcoholic and all those things. And so I stopped immediately. I said, Jay, you know what? There's two priests here. It's not my place to be sharing this stuff with you. I'm not your guy. You can talk to them. They'll set up an appointment for next week with you. He said, no, man, you speak about this stuff in an everyday way. I was finally understanding what this stuff means. That's part of the reason I never understood it. Like, I need somebody to speak in an everyday language, and you've been doing that. I said, I'm not your guy. I'm not your guy. Well, he was a salesman too, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. So he followed me around. It was my turn to shoot. And finally I said, you know what? I said, Jay, I'll go to dinner with you one night this week if you'll just leave me alone. So he said, all right, Tuesday night, pizza place, see you there. So I go home and I have to tell my wife I'm going to have to go tell some guy about the Holy Spirit over pizza on Tuesday night. You can imagine how she was like, excuse me, what? So the next morning I go to mass on Sunday. I said, Lord, if you want me to do this, you're going to have to do it for me. I came home after mass. I laid out the Bible and I said, all right, show me what you want to show me. Within an hour, I had 8 pages written down of the Holy Spirit from the Ruah over the water and Genesis to Pentecost and beyond. It just came flowing out of me. I'd read the Bible 5 times before I was 15. I knew the Word of God. I just forgotten that I knew it. And it started pouring out of me through His grace. And so I meet Jay and I look like a lawyer. I've got all these books laying on the table and he sits down at this pizza place. I was like, sit. And for an hour, I started just blowing through the Holy Spirit and what it means in your life and all of those things and what it really is and what the church says about it and all those things. At the end of it, he goes, wow, this is amazing. You should start a men's group. I said, nope, that's not your guy. I told you I'd do this. I did it. End of transaction. I'll get the check. See you never. Right. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept going, why do you say that? Every single time that I ask you to help me or that I ask you to talk to me, you keep saying no. I had not told a single person in my life other than family and work what had happened. We'd gotten involved in the parish. I was afraid that people would leave. They'd kick us out of the parish. They'd kick us out of the school. I was afraid my wife would be embarrassed. But in this moment, as he kept on, the Holy Spirit just moved me. And I said, Jay, I was arrested on a felony charge of cocaine less than a year ago. I'm not your guy. And he goes, wow, that's amazing. You should start a men's group. And I said, we should drug test you, man. Like, did you hear what I said? He goes, John, we're all broken, right? None of us are perfect. All of us have struggled in something. And you know our parish. We have a great men's club, but all we do is drink beer and raise money. We have the Knights of Columbus, but there's only 4 guys in that, and they just do service stuff. We don't have anything like this where men can just be real with one another. So he convinced me in 30, I don't know, a week later, we called 30 men together. Some he knew and some I didn't. Didn't tell them why. I said, hey, meet us at the parish on 7 o'clock at 7 o'clock in the family room.
What year was this?
So this was 2017.
Just recently.
So I was arrested on Holy Thursday in 2016. So we call these men. I tell my wife, she's not very happy about it, but I feel convicted by the Spirit. This is something I have to do. So I show up that night and I go to open the door. I could see in there. It was the time of year where it got dark early. So they couldn't see me, but I could see them. And I saw these men in there. They didn't know why they were there. I was a couple minutes late. So was the guy who had asked me to do this. And as soon as I grabbed the handle, the devil showed up again. Don't you do it. Don't you open that door. If you open that door, you're going to lose everything. People are going to know all these friends you made. They're going to leave you. Think how embarrassed your wife's going to be. They're going to kick you out of this parish. They're not going to let your kids go to school anymore here. And even if they do, everybody's going to ridicule your kids because you're the cokeheads kids and all that stuff. So I let go of the door and I made it about 3 paces towards the car. And all of a sudden I heard the voice of God in my life again. Like you hear in the Old Testament, God's not in the earthquake or in the storm. He's in the whisper. And I heard him say, John, you told me when you walked out of that cell, you'd be different. You told me if I gave you a chance, you'd give me your life. Turn around and open that door. And so I opened the door and I walked in there and all of a sudden the men were like, what are we doing here? And my buddy came sloshing in there with a cooler full of drinks and stuff to keep people satiated. And finally I said, look, guys, we have a great men's club here. We raise money and do all that stuff and provide for our kids, but we never talk about Jesus. And let me tell you what can happen in your life when that's the case. And I went blah. And I told him everything I've been telling you for however long this has been. And I was scared to death. I was ugly snot crying and all this stuff. And I kept thinking they're going to leave at any minute. These guys are going to get up and they're going to walk out and your whole life's over. Finally, I came to the end of it and I said, look, I've been walking with Father Martel and he believes I can do this. And he's given me permission to do this. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. He's the one that believes I can do it, not me. But he wants me to do it. I'm willing to do it. I can't be the only one who struggles. I want to build something for men. If you want to stay, You can hear about that. If you want to go, this isn't entrapment. I knew you didn't know why you were here. You can go. So I sat down like a sack of potatoes, just sobbing, snot crying, just disgusting, and going like, I just ruined my life. Next thing you know, the guy who invited me stood up next to me, and I thought, surely you're not leaving. You're the one that got me into this. But I looked up, and he was crying, and he said, I'm a terrible husband and father. I care more about my job and money than I do my wife and kids by the way I spend my time. And he sat down. And the next guy stood up and he goes, you guys think I have this perfect marriage. Most of you tease me about it, how Catholic we are and how amazing our marriage is. My wife left 3 weeks ago. I got papers in the mail today. I'm addicted to porn and she's had enough and she's leaving me. She's had enough. She's taken the kids, everything. And I haven't told any of you that. The next guy stood up and he said, y'all know I have 9 kids. And he kind of wobbled a little when he stood up. And he goes, I'm drunk right now. I've been in a hotel in downtown Memphis. I've had a case of beer. I've drank 24 beers. My wife and I fight because of the stress of the children and work and money and all that stuff. And when we fight, I escape. I've been in a hotel room in downtown Memphis. She thinks I'm at work. Work thinks I'm at home sick. And I Ubered up here when I got this text because I thought all we ever do up here at the parish is drink as men. And I was tired of drinking alone. He sat down, and Eddie, every man in that room, it was like pistons in an engine. Every single man in that room stood up and started pouring out where they were broken in their life. And that was the night that God showed me the power of vulnerability in a man's life. He took me back because I said I had a good scriptural background. In that moment, as these men were sharing, I started realizing my own life had been this. And this is so many men. I hear this at conferences all the time. You know, a man is supposed to work hard, never complain. Put your feelings, put away your feelings, shove them down, put your head down, work hard, never complain. Don't need anybody or anything. Be a one-man army. And so many men buy into that. And we shove all that stuff down. And what do? It comes out in another way,
Yep.
in vice, in porn, in drinking, in alcohol, in broken relationships, in infidelity, and all that stuff. But God goes to St. Paul goes to God in a moment in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. And he's begging for him to remove the thorn from his side 3 times. And God says, no, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That changed everything for me. I'd always looked at weakness as a bad thing. The world tells you to be vulnerable as a man, that you're less masculine, that all kind of other things that'll tell you that you're weak, you're susceptible to attack. But what God says is, no, it is in your weakness, in your humility, and the vulnerability that you display, and realizing and finally coming to that surrender moment that you finally realize you were never in control. You never could be. You've been fighting through all these things in your life, and you believed a lie that you have to be and do everything yourself, and that's what it takes to be a man. But what it takes to be a man is to hit your knees in front of me and surrender and say, I need you. And that doesn't make you weak. That makes you strong, because in that, as St. Paul goes on to say, if I'm to boast, let me boast in my weaknesses, my difficulties, my hardships, my burdens, because when I'm weak, I'm strong.
Wow.
That's what happened that night in that room full of men and in my life. That's launched a men's group that night in our parish that had men coming from all over our diocese. We had a deacon here in Memphis that still has a show on EWTN radio, Deacon Jeff Trzymski. He has the Catholic Cafe show. We got to being in the Crescio group together, and he heard about what was going on, and he asked me to start a podcast. I said, I don't know what I'm doing. He goes, you don't have to, just show up and talk. So I've been doing that ever since. And then that's where this ministry came from. We've been listened to in 160 countries around the world, been downloaded 500,000 times. It's crazy. And now I realized I don't have a theology degree. I'm not Scott Hahn. I can't write a book on Revelations in a couple of weeks or however long it takes him. Like, I'm not so-and-so or whatever. What am I good at, Lord? What have you made me to do? And it's to give others hope, to believe that they can come out of their brokenness, that they're not the sum of their mistakes, but they're the sum of God's love for them. And that there's the joy that they're looking for is in figuring that out and then going and living with that as their base, as their foundation, not what they can do or provide or any of that mess.
Yes.
That doesn't define your worth. What you do or don't do, what you make or don't make, what you have or don't have. Your worth is defined in simply the fact that God says you are worthy, because he says so.
Amen.
And that's it.
Amen, John. My goodness. My goodness.
Yeah.
Before we go, maybe in a minute, if that's possible, maybe a minute or two.
Sure.
Maybe bring us to the present day with the kids and with your wife, and reconciling with them as well as with the church.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, with my wife, God in prayer told me I was really worried about when is she going to see, when is she going to see, when is she going to realize this isn't, something that's going to fade away. This is a permanent change in my life. God came to me in prayer and said, John, it took you a long time to convince her of the man you were. It's going to take you a long time to convince her of the man you want to be now. You need to quit worrying about that and let me work on her heart. You go work on being the man that I'm calling you to be. And it's difficult. And I know you want her to love you right now, but it's not going to happen right now, not in the way that you're looking for. I'm going to deal with that. With my children, I just had to show them that I was different. I had to put my money where my mouth was. I had to actually live the way I was telling them I wanted to be. So they saw it. I was at all their games. I was at all their practices. I got involved in their life. I wanted it that we no longer watched what I wanted to watch. We watched what they wanted to watch. I spent time reading to them at night and praying with them and teaching them the prayers of the church. Right. And as that's how our family started reconcile. I built a relationship with Dr. Bob Schutz. I'm now one of the presenters for the JP2 Healing Center. And so continue to work on healing in my own life and with my family. And that's been a tremendous blessing. I mean, Bob is an amazing human being. He's a saint. So I did that. And with the church, I just kept saying, Lord, I will serve. I will serve. And I kept serving in all these capacities. And now I've traveled the world and preached all over the United States and Canada and all over the place and led pilgrimages and all these things, and the church and I are in right order again. I know the place in my life that it belongs, God, family, and then everything else.
Yeah.
And so that's the order, the way I order my life in. And I spend the best of my ability. I'm reading He Leadeth Me with Father Chiswick right now, but I'm trying to figure out how to surrender every single aspect of my life to God's will and really do it, not in word, but in deed.
John, thank you from the bottom of my heart for going into that detail. If the apostolate is big on vulnerability and you're the leader, you just shared with everyone what it means to be vulnerable, and I appreciate it. And I know a lot of people, men and women, will appreciate that.
Yeah.
Crucial for the church. Thank you again. Everyone, please share as usual, comment, subscribe, and pray for everyone that comes across this video and the entire body of Christ. Until next time, take care and God bless. Bye.